The wind howled through Dustford like a hungry wolf, carrying the bite of early winter and the promise of snow. Clara Whitlow stepped down from the freight wagon, her worn leather boots hitting the frozen mud with a soft thud. She clutched her travel satchel close, the weight of her few possessions a familiar comfort against her hip. "End of the line. Miss," the driver called down, already turning his mules toward the livery stable. "Matheson's saloon is straight ahead if you're looking for work." Clara nodded her thanks, though the driver had already dismissed her from his mind. She was used to that being overlooked, forgotten, pushed to the edges of things. 23 years of living had taught her that invisibility could be its own kind of armor. The town stretched before her in the fading light, a main street of packed earth, wooden buildings leaning against each other like drunks after a long night, smoke rising from chimneys in thin gray ribbons. The telegraph office clicked and chattered from somewhere down the way, its mechanical voice the only sign that civilization had found this corner of the Texas plains. Clara made her way toward the saloon, stepping carefully around frozen puddles and horse droppings. Through the frosted windows, she could see the warm glow of oil lamps and hear the low rumble of men's voices. Her stomach clenched not from hunger, though she hadn't eaten since yesterday's hardtack, but from the familiar knot of walking into a room full of strangers who would judge her before she opened her mouth. The door squealed on its hinges as she pushed inside. The warmth hit her like a wall, thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of whiskey, leather, and unwashed men. Conversation stuttered to a halt. A dozen pairs of eyes turned her way, taking in her plain brown dress, her unadorned bonnet, the absence of a wedding ring. "Well now," a voice drawled from behind the bar. "What have we here?" The bartender was a thick-set man with graying whiskers and shrewd eyes. Clara had met his type before, not unkind, but careful with his kindness, measuring it out like expensive whiskey. "I'm looking for work," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "I heard you might need a cook." Someone snorted. "Cook Jake Matheson. You been advertising for domestics now?" "Shut your mouth, Riggs," the bartender Matheson said without heat. To Clara, he added, "Kitchen works hard. Last girl lasted 3 days before she lit out for Fort Worth." "I've cooked for wagon trains and railroad camps," Clara said. "I can manage." A younger man at the bar, face flushed with drink, grinned unpleasantly. "Bet you can manage all sorts of things. Sugar." Clara's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, a quiet voice cut through the room. "The lady's looking for honest work. Maybe you should try it sometime." Donnelly. The speaker sat alone in the corner, hat pulled low, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. Clara couldn't see his face clearly in the shadows, but something in his stillness commanded attention. Donnelly's grin faltered. "Wasn't talking to you, Eli." "Weren't talking to anyone worth listening to either." The man Eli lifted his cup, took a slow sip. "Jake, you planning to hire the lady or not? Getting late for her to be standing around answering fool questions." Matheson cleared his throat. "Well, Miss
Whitlow. Clara Whitlow."
"Miss Whitlow, I can offer you $1 a day plus board. Kitchen opens at 5, closes when the last drunk goes home. It's rough work and rougher company." "I'll take it," Clara said quickly, before he could change his mind or she could lose her nerve. "There's a room upstairs, end of the hall. Nothing fancy, but the lock works." Matheson's eyes flickered meaningfully. "I run a respectful establishment. Anyone bothers you, they answer to me." Clara understood the unspoken terms. She was under his protection as long as she stayed respectable, worked hard, and didn't cause trouble. It was better than most places offered. "Thank you, Mr. Matheson." "Jake's fine. Dinner crowd starts in an hour. Mary left some aprons in the kitchen, probably fit you well enough." Clara started toward the kitchen, then paused. The man in the corner, Eli, had gone back to his coffee, seemingly lost in thought. On impulse, She approached his table. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked up then, and she saw his face properly for the first time, weathered by sun and wind, probably 30 or so, with dark eyes that seemed to see too much mixed blood. She thought Indian or Mexican somewhere in his lineage, though in border country that was common enough. "No need," he said. "Donnelly's all mouth anyway." "Still," Clara hesitated. "I appreciate it." Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or recognition of something kindred. Then it was gone, shuttered behind that careful stillness. "Best get to that kitchen," he said. Jake wasn't joking about the dinner crowd. Clara nodded and turned away, feeling oddly dismissed and oddly seen all at once. In the kitchen, she found the aprons Matheson had mentioned, along with a stove that needed blacking, pots that needed scouring, and a pantry that needed organizing. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work, grateful for something familiar to do with her hands. The dinner crowd was indeed rough cowboys from the surrounding ranches, a few merchants, traveling men of various sorts. Clara kept her head down and her hands busy, serving up beans and beef, cornbread and coffee. The work was hard but straightforward, and she found a kind of peace in the rhythm of it. It was near closing when Eli appeared at the kitchen door. "Meal was good," he said simply, setting his plate on the counter. "Thank you." Clara wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly aware of how she must look, hair escaping from its pins, face flushed from the heat of the stove. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a silver dollar. "For the meal. You already paid at the bar." "That was for Jake. This is for you." He set the coin on the counter. "Welcome to Dustford, Miss Whitlow, such as it is." Before she could protest or thank him, he was gone, the kitchen door swinging shut behind him. Clara picked up the dollar, turned it over in her fingers. It had been a long time since anyone had shown her kindness without wanting something in return. Later, in her small room under the eaves, she counted her meager savings by lamplight. The dollar from Eli sat separate from the rest, though she couldn't have said why. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. Snow was coming, she could smell it. A knock at her door made her freeze. Then Jake's voice. "Miss Whitlow got a proposition for you, if you're interested." Clara opened the door a crack. The saloon keeper stood in the hallway, hat in hand. "What kind of proposition?" "Silas Harlan, he owns the big spread south of town, needs a cook. Temporary-like, while his regular woman tends her sick mother. Pays better than I can offer. $2 a day plus found." Clara's heart jumped. That kind of money could set her up properly, maybe even let her save enough to start her own place eventually. But something in Jake's expression gave her pause. "Why are you telling me this?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Harlan's particular, likes things done his way, but you seem capable enough, and Lord knows you could use the money. Just be careful, is all. Don't sign nothing without reading it twice." "I see," Clara considered. "When would he need me?" "Tomorrow, if you're willing. His man'll be by with a wagon at first light." After Jake left, Clara sat on her narrow bed and weighed her options. $2 a day was more than she'd made since leaving the wagon trains, but Jake's warning nagged at her. And there had been something in the way the men in the saloon had gone quiet when Harlan's name was mentioned. She thought of Eli's dollar, of the simple kindness of it. Would she find such things at the Harlan ranch? Probably not. But kindness didn't pay for rooms or put food on tables. Clara packed her few belongings back into her satchel. Come morning, she would take the job. She had survived worse than particular men and their particular ways. Whatever waited for her at the Harlan ranch, she would face it as she had faced everything else, with her head up and her hands ready to work. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, white ghosts dancing past her window. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound seemed to carry all the loneliness of the plains with it. Clara blew out her lamp and tried to sleep, but her dreams were restless, full of wind and snow and dark eyes that saw too much. When dawn came pale and cold through her window, she was already awake, dressed, and waiting. The wagon arrived as promised, driven by a hard-faced man who didn't bother with pleasantries. Clara climbed aboard, her satchel clutched tight, and didn't look back as they rolled out of town. But she felt eyes on her as they passed the livery stable, and caught a glimpse of a familiar figure watching from the shadows. Eli stood there, still as stone, and something in his posture spoke of warning, of concern. Then the wagon turned a corner and he was gone, and there was only the white emptiness of the plains ahead, and the knowledge that she was heading into something that might be worse than loneliness. Stepping into the wolf's mouth, she murmured to herself, remembering her grandmother's old saying. The driver glanced back. "What's that?" "Nothing," Clara said, and pulled her thin coat tighter against the wind. "Just talking to myself." The snow fell harder as they left Dustford behind, covering their tracks almost as soon as they made them. By the time they reached the Harlan Ranch, the world had turned white and strange, and Clara felt as if she had traveled not just miles, but years, into a place where the ordinary rules might not apply. But she had made her choice. Now she would live with it, come what may. The Harlan Ranch sprawled across the landscape like a small kingdom, its boundaries marked by fence posts that disappeared into the white horizon. Clara's first impression was of order imposed by force buildings lined up with military precision, everything squared and measured and held in place by will as much as nails. The kitchen she inherited was a reflection of that same rigid control. Every pot had its place, every spice jar labeled in a cramped hand. A list of rules hung by the door, written in the same tight script: meal times, portions, approved supplies. Clara read it twice, her unease growing with each line. "You, the new cook." A woman appeared in the doorway, thin and sharp-featured, with eyes like chips of flint. "I'm Mrs. Garrett, housekeeper. Mr. Harlan expects breakfast at 6 sharp, dinner at noon, supper at 6. No exceptions." "I understand," Clara said. "Mrs. Garrett's mouth tightened. "See that you do. The men you'll be feeding work the new irrigation channels, rough sorts, but they know to keep their distance from the house. Mr. Riggs oversees them. He'll tell you what's needed." Clara had barely settled her belongings in the small room behind the kitchen when Riggs appeared. He was younger than she'd expected for a foreman, perhaps 35, with pale eyes that lingered too long and a smile that never quite reached them. "Miss Whitlow." He said her name like he was tasting it. "Silas told me we'd got ourselves a proper cook at last." "Mr. Riggs." Clara kept her voice neutral, her hands busy with her apron strings. "Just Riggs is fine." He leaned against the doorframe, blocking her exit. "I handle the work crews. Make sure everyone earns their keep. That includes you. I'm sure, Mr. Harlan will find no fault with my work. Silas delegates the household to me." His smile widened. "Any problems, any needs, you come straight to me." Understood. Clara understood perfectly. She'd met his type before, men who confused authority with ownership, who saw every woman as territory to be claimed. But she needed this job. "Of course," she said, then added pointedly, "I should start on breakfast. The men will be hungry." Riggs didn't move for a long moment, then stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. "Wouldn't want to keep you from your duties." The work crew was indeed rough 20 men, some Mexican, some Irish, a few freed slaves from back east, all with the hollow look of those who worked too hard for too little. Clara served them beans and salt pork, cornmeal mush and bitter coffee. The portions seemed meager for men doing heavy labor, but when she checked the stores, she found plenty of supplies. "Don't go soft on them." "Mrs." Garrett warned, catching Clara adding an extra ladle to a young Mexican boy's plate. "Mr. Harlan's precise about provisions." But Clara had seen hunger before, knew its patient, grinding cruelty. She began adding a bit more lard to the beans, an extra handful of cornmeal to the pot. Small things that wouldn't be noticed in the ledgers but might make the difference between strength and starvation. It was the third day when Eli Kane arrived with a string of horses. Clara was hauling water from the well when she heard the hoofbeats. She looked up to see him leading 6 mares toward the corrals, moving with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. He saw her at the same moment and touched his hat brim in acknowledgement. Miss Whitlow. Mr. Kane. She set down her buckets, aware of how the other ranch hands had stopped to watch. I didn't expect to see you here. Harlan buys horses from Rio Mesa Ranch. I bring them over when needed. His eyes swept the compound, taking in details. How are you finding the work? Before Clara could answer, Riggs appeared from the barn like a bad penny. Well, Eli Kane gracing us with his presence. The foreman's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Thought you'd learn to stick to your own kind. Eli's expression didn't change. Just delivering horses Harlan bought and paid for. Half-breed horses for a half-breed wrangler, Riggs said with a mean smile. Fitting. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Clara saw Eli's hand shift slightly, not quite reaching for anything but ready. The watching men grew very still. The horses are in the corral, Eli said quietly. Receipts in the saddlebag. I'll be taking my leave now. You do that. Riggs stepped closer to Clara, possessive as a dog marking territory. We've got everything we need right here. Eli's gaze flickered to Clara, a question in it. She gave the smallest shake of her head. I'm fine. Don't make trouble for yourself. He held her eyes a moment longer, then mounted his horse in one smooth motion. As he rode out, Clara heard Riggs mutter something about savage blood and felt her stomach turn, but she kept her head down and her thoughts to herself. That night, she found an excuse to check the supplies ledger and discovered what she'd suspected the provisions charged to the workers were nearly double what actually reached their plates. She began keeping her own records in secret, noting discrepancies in a small journal she hid beneath her mattress. It was dangerous, she knew, but something in her rebelled at being made complicit in the theft. The next week brought bitter cold and news that changed everything. Clara was serving the noon meal when she overheard Riggs talking to another hand. Railroad's definitely coming through, he was saying. Silas has been buying up water rights quiet-like. Once he controls the river access, every farmer in 50 miles will have to sell or starve. Clara's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Water rights. In this country, that was life or death. That evening, Mrs. Garrett appeared with a document. Mister, Harlan needs you to sign this. Just a formality, says you received your wages in advance. Clara read it carefully. It wasn't about wages at all, but a debt agreement, claiming she owed the ranch for transportation, lodging, and sundry supplies, totaling nearly 3 months' wages. I can't sign this, Clara said. It's not true. I haven't received any advance. Mrs. Garrett's face hardened. Mr. Harlan doesn't like difficult employees. Then he'll appreciate one who reads contracts carefully. The housekeeper left with the unsigned paper, and Clara knew she'd crossed a line. Sure enough, the next morning Riggs was waiting in the kitchen. Heard you're having trouble with paperwork, he said conversationally. I won't sign a false document. False. He picked up a kitchen knife, tested its edge. That's a harsh word. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe I should explain it better. Privately. Clara backed toward the stove, where a pot of hot grease bubbled. I understand perfectly. Do you? He moved closer. Girl like you, no family, no connections. Accidents happen on ranches. Unfortunate things. The kitchen door banged open. One of the workers, the young Mexican boy Clara had been feeding extra, stood there wide-eyed. Senora Clara, the men are asking... He stopped, taking in the scene. Riggs's face darkened.
Get out, boy.
But the interruption had broken the moment. Other workers appeared behind the boy, drawn by some instinct for trouble. Riggs looked at the gathering crowd and stepped back. "We'll finish this conversation later," he said to Clara, then pushed through the men and out. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She knew Riggs would make good on his threat, knew she should run. But where she had little money, no horse, and the nearest town was 20 miles of frozen prairie away. Near midnight, she heard horses outside, peering through her small window. She saw riders approaching the ranch, Eli Kane among them. Though what business brought him here at such an hour, she couldn't guess. They met with Harlan on the porch, voices low and urgent. She caught fragments: water rights, federal marshal, railroad investigators. Then Riggs' voice, clearer. "Don't worry about the girl. I'll handle her." Clara's blood turned to ice. She grabbed her few possessions, wrapped herself in her thin coat, and slipped out the back door. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but she didn't stop. Better to freeze on the prairie than face whatever Riggs had planned. She'd made it maybe half a mile when hoofbeats thundered behind her. She tried to run, but the snow was too deep, her skirts too cumbersome. A rider pulled alongside, and she raised her hands to fight. "Easy." It was Eli's voice. "Easy, Miss Whitlow. I'm not going to hurt you." She was shaking, from cold or fear or both. "Riggs, he's—" "I know." Eli swung down from his horse, shrugged out of his heavy coat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Heard him threatening you? That's why I came back. At midnight, had a feeling trouble was brewing." He lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness, then mounted behind her. "A ranch like Harlan's. Trouble's always brewing. Hold on." They rode through the snow-swept darkness. Clara acutely aware of his warmth at her back, the steady strength of his arms around her as he guided the horse. She should have been terrified fleeing into the night with a near stranger, but something about Eli's quiet presence made her feel safer than she had in weeks. "Where are we going?" she asked as the ranch lights disappeared behind them. "My place. It's not much, but it's secure. We'll figure out the rest come morning." "I can't. People will talk." "Let them." His voice was grim. "Better gossiping tongues than Riggs' hands on you." Clara shivered, and his arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need," he said, just as he had that first night. But this time, she heard something different in his voice. Anger, maybe, or determination. They rode on through the bitter night, toward whatever rough shelter Eli called home, while behind them the Harlan ranch squatted like a spider in the snow, waiting. Clara closed her eyes and let herself be carried forward, knowing she had burned her bridges, but finding, to her surprise, that she didn't care. Some bridges needed burning. Some places weren't worth the price of staying. The cabin materialized out of the swirling snow like something from a dream. Small, solid, tucked against a rise that sheltered it from the worst of the wind. Eli dismounted first, then helped Clara down, her legs stiff with cold. "It's not much," he said again, pushing open the heavy door. "But it's warm." The interior was sparse but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding a few dishes and supplies. Everything neat, everything in its place, but with a loneliness that made Clara's chest tight. Eli moved efficiently, stirring the banked coals to life, adding wood until flames danced up the chimney. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the cold that had settled in Clara's bones. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair. "I'll make coffee." Clara sat, still wrapped in his coat, watching him work. His movements were economical, practiced a man used to taking care of himself. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy with unspoken things. "Why did you come back?" she asked finally. Eli's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about Riggs, the way he looked at you." Seen that look before. He set the pot on to boil. Man like that doesn't take no for an answer. You risked a lot helping me. Not so much. He pulled out the other chair, sat across from her. In the firelight, she could see the planes of his face more clearly. Strong bones, weathered skin, eyes that held depths. Harlan needs my horses. He'll bluster, but he won't cut ties over a cook. I'm not sure that's true. Maybe not, he shrugged. Doesn't matter now. The coffee boiled. He poured 2 cups, the bitter smell filling the small space. Clara wrapped her hands around the tin cup, grateful for its heat. I can't stay here, she said. People will talk no matter what. His voice was flat. They see an Indian breed and a white woman. They make up their own stories. You're not? Clara stopped, flustered. Not what not Indian. A smile ghosted across his face. There and gone. My mother was Comanche. Father was Irish. For all the good it did either of them. I didn't mean... I know. He softened the words with a look. Just saying, I'm used to talk. Question is whether you can handle it. Clara thought about the alternative Riggs' hands. Harlan's contracts. The slow trap closing around her. I've handled worse than gossip. I figured as much. They drank their coffee in silence. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. But inside was warm and still. Clara found herself studying Eli's face when he wasn't looking the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the small scar on his jaw, the careful way he held himself even in rest. I should explain, she said suddenly, about why I was running. You don't owe me explanations. Maybe not, but I want... She paused, searching for words. I found out things. About Harlan. He's been cheating those workers, skimming their provisions, and there's more something about water rights. The railroad. Eli's expression sharpened. What about water rights? Clara told him what she'd overheard, about the ledgers she'd found, the contract misses. Garrett had tried to make her sign. As she spoke, his face grew darker. Damn, he said quietly when she finished. Always knew Harlan was a bastard, but this... He stood abruptly, paced to the window. He's trying to control the whole valley, force everyone out or under his thumb. Can he do that? With enough money and the right connections, yes. Eli turned back to her. Sheriff Mott owes him. Half the town council, too. Railroads coming means land prices are jumping. Control the water. You control everything. Someone should stop him. With what laws on his side, bought and paid for. The bitterness in his voice was sharp. People like us don't win against people like him. People like us. Clara set down her cup, harder than necessary. I may not have much, Mr. Kane, but I'm not ready to roll over and show my belly just because a rich man says so. Something flared in his eyes, surprise. Maybe, or approval. That's brave talk for a woman alone. I'm not alone now, am I? The words hung between them, heavier than she'd intended. Eli went very still, and Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. No, he said quietly, you're not. He moved then, crossing to kneel by the fireplace, adding another log with careful precision. When he spoke again, his back was to her. You can have the bed. I'll take the floor. I couldn't. You could and you will. He stood, dusting his hands. There's a curtain we can hang for privacy. Water in the pitcher for washing. I'll check the horses. He grabbed a coat from a peg not as heavy as the one he'd given her and headed for the door. Eli. He paused, hand on the latch. Thank you, Clara said, for everything. He looked back at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. I told you, he said. No need for thanks. Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm, leaving Clara alone with the fire and her tumbling thoughts. She rose, explored the small space, Everything spoke of a solitary life, carefully ordered shirts folded precisely, dishes stacked just so, but there were touches of unexpected softness too, a book of poetry on the shelf, a small carved horse on the mantel, a quilt that someone had made with love and skill. Clara found the curtain he'd mentioned, strung it across the corner to create a private space. She washed quickly in the cold water, changed into her spare dress. The bed was narrow but clean, the quilt warm. She should have been afraid, alone in a strange man's cabin in the middle of nowhere. Instead, she felt safer than she had in weeks. When Eli returned, snow dusting his shoulders, Clara was sitting by the fire again, the poetry book in her lap. "Browning," she said, holding it up. "I wouldn't have guessed. My mother taught me to read with that book." He hung up his coat, not meeting her eyes. "One of the few things I have of hers." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "It's fine." He moved to the stove, set about warming more coffee. She'd have liked knowing someone was reading it again. Clara watched him work, this quiet man with his careful movements and hidden depths. "Will you tell me about her?" He glanced at her, surprised. "Not much to tell. She died when I was 12. Fever took her." "And your father?"
Gone before that. Drink got him.
His voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara heard the old pain beneath. "Rancher named McKenna took me in, taught me horses. Good man. He's the one suggested I work for Rio Mesa." "But you don't live there." "Like my own space." He poured fresh coffee, handed her a cup. "Gets crowded, everyone knowing your business." "I understand that. Figured you might." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the storm was picking up, wind shrieking like something alive, but inside was warm, safe, a small circle of light against the darkness. "I should tell you," Eli said suddenly, "what I was really doing at Harlan's tonight." Clara looked up, waiting. "Wasn't just checking on you, though that was part of it." He set down his cup, faced her directly. "Been hearing things. Federal marshal might be coming through, investigating land fraud. Some of the smaller ranchers have been writing letters, complaining about water access. If we could get evidence to the right people." "The ledgers," Clara breathed. "The false contracts." "Exactly." His eyes were intent on hers. "But it's dangerous. Harlan's got reach, and he doesn't play gentle with threats." "I'm already a threat, just by what I know. That's what worries me." The way he said it, quiet and serious, made something flutter in Clara's chest. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Eli was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low. "First time I saw you, in Jake's place, you looked—" He paused, searching for words. "Lost, maybe, but not broken. Seen plenty of broken people out here. You were different." "Different how?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with propriety. "You've got steel in you. Hidden, maybe.
But it's there. Man'd be a fool not to see it."
The air between them crackled like the fire. Clara's heart was beating too fast, her skin too warm despite the drafts creeping through the walls. "Eli," she started, not sure what she meant to say. He stood abruptly. "You should sleep. Long day tomorrow, figuring out what to do." "What about you?" "I'll keep watch. Case Riggs gets ambitious." "You can't stay up all night." "Done it before." He pulled a rifle from behind the door, checked its load. "Go on now. Rest." Clara retreated behind the curtain, lay down fully dressed on the narrow bed. Through the thin fabric, she could see his silhouette by the fire, standing guard like something out of an old story. "Eli?" she called softly. "Yes." "I'm not lost anymore." A long pause, then, so quiet she almost missed it. "I know." Clara pulled the quilt up to her chin, closed her eyes. The wind howled and the fire crackled, and somewhere in the darkness, Eli Kane kept watch. She thought she wouldn't sleep, but exhaustion pulled her under, and her dreams were full of firelight and safety and words unspoken hanging in the air like promises. When she woke, gray dawn was seeping through the shutters and the smell of bacon filled the air. Eli was at the stove, his back to her, and for a moment Clara allowed herself to imagine this was ordinary, waking in a warm cabin to the sound of someone making breakfast, someone who cared whether she ate. Then reality crashed back. She was a runaway employee. He was harboring her, and outside the storm had passed, which meant decisions had to be made. But for now, for just this moment. She pulled the quilt closer and watched him cook. This careful man who'd pulled her from the snow and offered shelter without condition, who spoke of her steel as if it were something precious. "Morning," he said without turning, and Clara smiled despite everything. "Morning," she replied, and rose to face whatever came next. They had barely finished breakfast when hoofbeats thundered outside. Eli moved swiftly, pressing the rifle into Clara's hands before she could protest. "You know how to use this." "My father taught me." Her voice was steadier than her hands. "Good. Stay back from the windows." Through a crack in the shutters, Clara counted 6 riders. Riggs led them, his pale eyes scanning the cabin like a wolf studying prey. Sheriff Mott rode beside him, his badge glinting in the weak morning sun. "Kane," Riggs's voice carried clear through the cold air. "We know she's in there. Send her out and we'll forget this whole misunderstanding." Eli opened the door, stepped onto the small porch. He held no weapon, but something in his stance spoke of readiness. "Morning, Sheriff. Little early for social calls." Mott shifted in his saddle. "This is official business. Eli, the girl's under contract to Mr. Harlan. Taking her constitutes theft." "Can't steal a person." "Sheriff, thought we settled that question some years back." "Don't get smart with me. Breed." Riggs's hand drifted toward his sidearm. "That woman signed papers. She's got obligations." "I signed nothing." Clara stepped out beside Eli, the rifle held low but visible. "And I'll swear to that in any court." Riggs's smile was ugly. "Your word against Mr. Harlan's against mine." He looked at Mott. "Sheriff, I believe we've got cause to search the premises. Make sure no property's been stolen." "Now hold on," Eli started. "It's all right." Clara's voice cut through clear and strong. "Search away. You'll find nothing of Harlan's here except the lies you brought with you." The men dismounted, pushed past into the cabin. Clara heard crashes, furniture overturning, but kept her eyes on Riggs. He studied her with that snake's smile. Brave talk for a woman without friends. "She's got friends." The new voice made everyone turn. 3 riders approached from the east. Jake Matheson from the saloon, the blacksmith Josiah Washington, and, surprisingly, the old minister Samuel Crane. "Gentlemen," Mott's voice held a warning. "This doesn't concern you." Public road. "Sheriff," Jake said mildly. "Just out for a morning ride. Happened to pass by." He looked at Clara. "Miss Whitlow. You all right?" "Well enough, Mr. Matheson." Josiah, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and skin dark as forge iron, swung down from his horse. "Heard there was some trouble out here. Thought we'd check on our neighbors." "Since when is she your neighbor?" Riggs demanded. "Since she served me a fair meal for a fair price," Josiah said. "Since she showed kindness to folks others look past, that makes her neighbor enough for me." The searchers emerged empty-handed, which clearly frustrated Riggs. "There's still the matter of breach of contract." "What contract?" Old Samuel Crane's voice was mild, but it carried authority. "I'd be interested to see this document. As a man of God, I often witness such papers. Don't recall seeing Miss Whitlow's name on anything binding." "It's at the ranch," Riggs said quickly. Too quickly. Then perhaps we should all ride back and examine it together. The minister suggested, in daylight, with witnesses. Make everything proper and legal. Clara saw Mott exchange glances with Riggs. The sheriff cleared his throat. That won't be necessary. If Miss Whitlow says she didn't sign anything, and there's no evidence of theft—
There is evidence,
Clara said suddenly. Everyone turned to her. Evidence of theft, but not by me. She told them about the skimmed provisions, the false ledgers, the workers charged for food they never received. As she spoke, she saw Jake's face darken, Josiah's hands clench. That's slander, Riggs snarled.
Sheriff, arrest her.
For what? Eli asked quietly. Telling the truth. For theft. She took those ledgers she's talking about. Ranch property. I took nothing. I looked at them, remembered what I saw. Clara met Mott's eyes. Unless looking is now a crime. Sheriff, Mott was sweating despite the cold. This is getting complicated. Maybe everyone should just calm down. Good advice. Jake's hand rested casual-like near his coat. Clara knew he wore a gun there, most men did. Why don't you boys head back to the ranch? We'll all pretend this morning didn't happen. Can't do that. Riggs' voice was flat. Mister, Harlan wants his property returned. I am no one's property. Clara stepped forward, and something in her movement made Riggs step back. I came to this territory free. I remain free, and I'll die free before I let men like you and Harlan change that. Big words, Riggs said, but out here might makes right. Then you'd best bring more might. Josiah flexed his shoulders, because right now, the count doesn't favor you. It was true. 3 of Riggs' men were already edging toward their horses, unwilling to face the blacksmith's massive frame or the cold certainty in Eli's eyes. Mott made the decision. We're done here. Riggs, if Mr. Harlan has a legal complaint, he can file it proper in town. This isn't over, Riggs promised. Mounting his horse, his eyes found Clara. You can't hide behind these men forever. I'm not hiding, Clara said. I'm standing right here. After they left, trailing dust and threats, Clara's knees went weak. Eli steadied her with a hand on her elbow, gentle as his touch on a spooked horse. You did good, he said quietly. Thought we were riding into a massacre, Jake admitted, pulling out a flask and taking a healthy swallow. Miss Whitlow, you've got sand. I'll give you that. What happens now? Clara asked. Samuel Crane spoke up. Now we make sure the truth gets told. Josiah, how many of your customers work for Harlan? Dozen or so. They come for horseshoes, small repairs, pay when they can. Talk to them, carefully. See if they'll confirm what Miss Whitlow saw. The minister turned to Jake. Your saloons where news travels? Spread the word quiet-like about the skimmed provisions. What about the law? Clara asked. Sheriff Mott is bought, but not stupid. Jake said, push comes to shove. He'll save his own skin over Harlan's. We just need to make sure the shove comes from high enough. The federal marshal, Eli said, if he's really coming. He is. Samuel smiled slightly. I've been corresponding with certain parties about irregularities in land transfers. Marshal Thompson should arrive within the month. They made plans quietly, carefully. Clara would stay at Eli's cabin for now, safer than town, and propriety be damned. Jake would put out word she was under his protection as an employee. Josiah would sound out the workers. Samuel would continue his letters. After the others left, Clara and Eli stood alone in the wreckage of his cabin. Overturned furniture, scattered belongings, his few possessions treated with contempt. I'm sorry, Clara said, kneeling to gather scattered books. This is my fault. No, Eli's voice was firm. This is Harlan's doing, Riggs' doing, not yours. Together they set things right, working in companionable silence. When the cabin was restored, Eli made fresh coffee and they sat at his small table, the morning's violence settling into memory.
Why did they come? Clara asked. Jake and the others, they barely know me.
Jake knows right from wrong. So does Josiah and Samuel. Eli smiled slightly. Samuel's been waiting years for someone to stand up to Harlan.
But the risk, life's risk. Clara,
the use of her first name sent warmth through her. Question is, what's worth risking for?
And I am. She meant it light, but it came out serious.
Eli looked at her across the table. This man who'd offered shelter without condition, who'd stood between her and danger like it was natural as breathing. Yes, he said simply. You are. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Then Eli stood, breaking the spell. I should check on the horses. That search spooked them. Clara watched him go, then busied herself with the small domesticities of the cabin. She found his mending, sat by the window to work on it. Such a strange thing, to be sewing a man's shirts like a wife would, when she was neither wife nor servant but something undefined. When Eli returned, he found her there, his shirt in her lap, afternoon light catching in her hair. He stopped in the doorway, and Clara looked up to find an expression on his face that made her heart skip. You don't have to do that, he said roughly.
I want to.
She held up the mended shirt.
It's good work. Keeps my hands busy.
Unless you object. No. He came inside, hung up his hat. No objection. They spent the afternoon in quiet tasks, Eli working leather for a new bridle, Clara finishing the mending. The domestic piece of it was almost painful in its sweetness, a glimpse of what life could be if the world were different. As evening fell, Eli started dinner. Clara watched him move around the small kitchen space, competent and self-contained.
You never married?
She asked, then blushed at her boldness. No. He seasoned the pan carefully. Never seemed right. Because of your blood. He glanced at her. Partly, white women see the Indian. Indian women see the white. Gets lonesome being neither one thing nor other.
I don't see that,
Clara said quietly.
I just see you.
Eli's hands stilled. When he turned to face her fully, his expression was raw, uncertain.
Careful, Clara. I'm not a man who knows pretty words or gentle ways. I know horses and hard work and keeping my distance.
Maybe I don't want distance. The words hung between them like a challenge. Eli took a step toward her, then stopped, fighting some internal battle. You're under my protection, he said finally. Wouldn't be right. I'm not some helpless child needing rescue. Clara stood, faced him. I'm a woman who makes her own choices, and I choose. She faltered, suddenly aware of what she was saying, what she was asking, but Eli was already turning away. Shoulders tight with control. We should eat, he said, early morning tomorrow. They ate in silence, the easiness of the afternoon shattered. Clara helped clean up, then retreated behind her curtain, berating herself for pushing too hard, too fast. In the darkness, she heard Eli moving about, banking the fire, checking the locks. Then his voice, quiet Clara. Yes, what you said about choosing. A long pause. Just give it time. Let's survive Harlan first, then see what choices we have. It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't what her heart wanted either. Still, Clara understood. He was right, they had bigger battles ahead. Personal desires had to wait. All right, she said softly. Time. She heard him settle by the fire, taking up his guard post again. Outside, coyotes called across the darkness, and Clara pulled her blanket higher, wondering what tomorrow would bring. For now, she was safe. She was free, and somewhere in this rough cabin, a careful man kept watch, holding the world at bay for just a little longer. It would have to be enough. Spring came early that year, melting snow to reveal the full scope of Harlan's scheme, where water should have flowed freely down established channels. New ditches cut across the landscape like scars, diverting precious streams toward Harlan's holdings. Clara stood with Eli on a rise overlooking the valley, watching workers reinforce a dam that shouldn't exist.
"He's choking them out,"
she said quietly. "The Hendersons, the Millers, even the Yazzie family, their wells are already running low. And it's legal," Eli said bitterly. "Every document filed proper with the county. Water rights transferred voluntarily when folks couldn't pay manufactured debts." They'd spent weeks gathering evidence, talking carefully to workers, documenting the diversions. Clara had drawn maps, recorded testimonies, compiled a damning picture of systematic theft, but Harlan had been careful, keeping just within the bounds of law.
"The marshal's due any day,"
Clara reminded him.
"Samuel sent word."
"If he comes at all." Eli's pessimism had deepened as more families packed up, driven out by thirst and debt. Men like Harlan have ways of delaying justice. A dust cloud on the horizon caught their attention. Riders, moving fast. Eli pulled Clara behind an outcropping of rock, but the riders passed below without looking up Harlan's men, heading toward town.
"Something's happening,"
Eli murmured. They returned to find the cabin surrounded, not by gunmen this time, but by neighbors the Morrison family, the Yamasakis, others Clara had come to know. Their faces were grim. "Railroad sent a man," Tom Morrison said without preamble. "Surveyor. He's meeting with Harlan now, planning the route. Once that's settled, land prices will triple." His wife added, "Harlan will make a fortune on property he stole."
"What about the marshal?"
Clara asked. "No word." Morrison spat in the dust. "Starting to think he ain't coming." The group dispersed into worried clusters. Clara noticed the Yazzie family standing apart. Joseph Yazzie, his wife Maria, their grown son Robert, who'd been educated back east but returned to help his family.
"Mrs. Yazzie,"
Clara approached carefully.
"how are you managing?"
Maria's weathered face was stoic. "Our spring is down to a trickle. We're hauling water from the river. But if Harlan claims that too..."
"He can't claim the whole river,"
Clara said. "Can't he?" Robert's voice held the bitter education of experience. "When the law's written by those who benefit from it." Clara thought of something. "Your father, he kept the old Spanish grant maps, didn't he, from before the territory changed hands?" Joseph and Robert exchanged glances.
"Why do you ask?"
"Because if we can prove the original water allocations, show that Harlan's claims contradict prior agreements." "Spanish grants don't hold much weight in American courts," Robert said. But his father was already nodding thoughtfully. "Still," Joseph said slowly, "it might seed doubt, make the federal men look closer." That evening, Clara spread the accumulated evidence across Eli's table ledgers she'd memorized and recreated. Testimonies carefully written down, now the possibility of historical documents. The lamplight flickered over papers that represented dozens of lives being slowly crushed. "It's not enough," Eli said. "We need something that shows criminal action, not just sharp practice." "Then we get it." Clara's jaw set. "Harlan's meeting with the railroad man tomorrow. If we could overhear..." "Too dangerous."
"Everything's dangerous now."
She met his eyes steadily.
"Eli, people are suffering. Children are going thirsty. If we don't act..."
A knock interrupted her. They both tensed, but the voice that called out was familiar. "It's Josiah. Got news." The blacksmith entered, filling the small cabin with his presence. "One of Harlan's workers came to me, scared, says Harlan's planning something for tomorrow night. Something about clearing the last obstacles."
"The families who won't sell,"
Clara breathed. "That'd be my guess." Josiah's face was grim. Man was half drunk, talking about fires and accidents. Eli stood abruptly. "We need to warn them." "Already done. But warning won't stop it." Josiah looked between them. We need the law on our side. Or at least witnesses Harlan can't buy.
The telegraph, Clara said suddenly. If we could get word out, to the newspapers maybe, or the federal offices directly.
Harlan controls the telegraph office. Eli reminded her. In town, yes, but there's a way station 20 miles east. If someone could ride there. They planned through the night. Josiah would organize the families, set up watches. Eli would ride to the way station with their compiled evidence. Clara wanted to go with him, but both men were adamant she was too recognizable, too wanted by Harlan.
Then what do I do? She demanded. Sit here and wait.
You coordinate, Josiah said. Someone needs to keep the information flowing, keep people connected. That's you. Dawn found Eli saddling his best horse, the evidence wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in his saddlebags. Clara stood in the doorway, fighting the urge to beg him to stay.
Be careful,
she said instead. He swung into the saddle, then surprised her by leaning down. Clara, if something happens. Nothing will happen.
If it does,
his voice was firm. Get to Samuel Crane. He'll see you somewhere safe. I'm not leaving, not unless you're with me. Something flared in his eyes. For a moment she thought he'd kiss her, wanted him to, but he only touched her cheek, briefly, gently. 2 days, he said. I'll be back in 2 days. She watched him ride out, taking part of her heart with him. The first day passed quietly. Clara coordinated with the families, helping them share water, set up signal systems. She felt useful, needed, part of something larger than her own survival. But as night fell, orange light bloomed on the horizon. Fire. Clara ran outside to see flames licking at the Henderson place. No accident. The fire burned in a perfect line along their fence, heading for the house. Without thinking, she grabbed buckets and ran toward the flames. Others were already there, neighbors forming bucket brigades, fighting desperately against the deliberately set blaze. Clara worked until her hands blistered, her lungs burned. Her dress was black with soot.
They saved the house, barely, but the message was clear. This was just the beginning.
Where's the sheriff? Someone demanded. Conveniently absent, Morrison spat. Just like always when Harlan's boys are working. As dawn broke over the scorched landscape, a rider approached. Clara's heart leaped, but it wasn't Eli. It was Robert Yazzie, riding hard.
They hit our place too,
he gasped. Tried to dynamite the last spring. We stopped them, but my father's hurt. How bad? Clara was already gathering medical supplies. Gunshot, shoulder, mother's tending him, but... I'm coming. She turned to the others.
Keep watch. They'll try again.
At the Yazzie homestead, Clara found Joseph pale but conscious, Maria pressing cloth to his wound. Clara had learned rough medicine on the wagon trains, enough to clean wounds, slow bleeding, keep people alive until real help came.
Bullet's still in there,
she said after examining him.
Needs to come out.
Do it, Joseph gritted. She worked by lamplight, Robert holding his father steady, Maria heating water and tearing bandages. The bullet came free in a rush of blood that Clara quickly staunched.
He needs rest,
she told Maria,
and watching for fever.
You have our gratitude, Maria said formally. Then, softer, the old maps Robert mentioned, they're hidden beneath the altar stone in the mission ruins. If we don't survive this...
You will,
Clara said firmly.
We all will.
But riding back to Eli's cabin as afternoon waned toward evening, she wondered, where was Eli? Had he reached the telegraph station? Was help coming? Or were they alone against Harlan's growing violence? The cabin was as she'd left it, but something felt wrong. Clara approached carefully, the hair on her neck prickling. The door stood slightly open. She was certain she'd barred it. Well. Riggs stepped out of the shadows inside, 2 men flanking him. The little cook returns. Clara turned to run, but more men emerged from behind the woodshed. Trapped, In. Mr. Harlan wants a word, Riggs said conversationally, about the trouble you've been causing, the lies you've been spreading.
The truth? You mean truth?
Riggs tested the word like wine, found it sour.
Out here, truth is what powerful men say it is. You're about to learn that lesson.
They bound her hands, ignoring her struggles, as they lifted her onto a horse. Clara caught sight of smoke columns rising from multiple homesteads across the valley. Harlan wasn't waiting anymore, he was clearing the board. Eli Kane won't let this stand, she said. Riggs smiled unpleasantly. Kane's being dealt with. Shame about highway robbers on these roads. Man traveling alone, carrying valuables, anything could happen. Ice filled Clara's veins. They'd known about the evidence, about Eli's mission. How? As they rode toward the Harlan ranch, Clara's mind raced. Someone had betrayed them. But who, and was Eli alive or dead on some lonely road? The evidence scattered to the wind. Behind them, the smoke rose higher, and the water ran in its stolen channels. And the land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for justice or doom. The fire started in the old barn just after midnight. Clara, locked in Harlan's root cellar, heard the shouts first, then smelled the smoke seeping through the floorboards above. Within minutes, the controlled chaos of firefighting erupted across the ranch. "Let me out," she pounded on the cellar door. "There are horses in there." No one came. The smoke thickened, and Clara heard the terrible screaming of trapped animals, using a broken crate slat. She attacked the door's rusty hinges with desperate strength. The top hinge gave way just as boots thundered overhead. She shoved through the partially open door to find the ranch in chaos. The barn was fully engulfed. Sparks carried on a sudden wind toward the other buildings. Men ran everywhere with buckets, their faces orange in the firelight. Without thinking, Clara ran toward the barn. The horses' screams pierced the roar of flames. She grabbed a blanket from a fence post, dunked it in a water trough, and plunged toward the barn doors. "Are you insane?" Someone grabbed her arm. Not Riggs, but one of the workers. "It's coming down." The horses already got most out, but he pointed to the far end where flames hadn't reached yet. Mare and foal still trapped. Beam fell across their stall. Clara didn't hesitate. She wrapped the wet blanket around herself and went in. The heat was like a living thing, pressing against her from all sides. Smoke burned her eyes, her lungs. She dropped to her knees, crawling below the worst of it. Following the terrified whinnying, the mare stood pressed against the stall's back wall, her foal huddled beneath her. A burning beam had indeed fallen, blocking their exit. Clara grabbed a pitchfork, using it as a lever. The beam shifted slightly, showering her with sparks that burned through her dress. "Come on," she coughed, levering harder. The beam rolled aside just enough. "Move now." The mare needed no encouragement. She burst from the stall, her foal stumbling after. Clara tried to follow, but her strength gave out. The smoke was too thick, her lungs screaming for air. Strong hands grabbed her, hauled her bodily from the barn just as a section of roof collapsed. She gasped in the clean air, retching, as someone poured water over her smoking clothes. "You damn fool woman!" The voice was Eli's, harsh with fear. "You could have—" She blinked up at him through streaming eyes. "You're alive." "Barely." He had a gash across his forehead, his shirt torn and blood-stained. "Ambush on the road, but I made it to the station, sent the telegrams, then saw the fire from the ridge, knew something was wrong. The evidence. Safe. Hidden." He helped her sit up, his hands checking for serious burns. "Federal marshals are coming. Should be here by noon tomorrow." "If we last that long?" She looked around at the chaos. The barn was gone, but they'd saved the other buildings. Men slumped exhausted wherever they'd stopped, covered in soot and sweat. That's when she noticed these weren't all Harlan's men. She recognized faces Morrison, several of the Mexican workers, even young Robert Yazzie. What?
Wind changed. Josiah appeared, his huge frame blackened with soot. Fire jumped to the Morrison place. Would have taken half the valley if we hadn't all pitched in. Where's Harlan? Clara asked. Run off when the fire started, one of his own workers said bitterly. Left us to burn. As dawn broke gray and smoky, the strange alliance held. Enemies had become firefighters, united by the common threat. Clara found herself organizing again water for the exhausted men, treatment for burns, food from the undamaged kitchen. You're free to go, she told the Harlan workers who'd been essentially enslaved by debt. He's gone. The contracts won't hold when the marshals see them. Some left immediately. Others lingered, uncertain. One approached her Miguel, whose extra rations she'd tried to provide. Senora, the barn fire, it was not accident. I saw Riggs with the oil can, arguing with Senor Harlan. I think Harlan wanted only small fire, for insurance. But Riggs, he shrugged expressively. The wind. Clara remembered that sudden gust that had turned a controlled burn into catastrophe. Riggs wanted more damage. See, he was angry about you, about the men listening to you, wanted to teach lesson. Where's Riggs now? Gone with Harlan, but... Miguel leaned closer. I heard them say about meeting the railroad man at Squaw Creek. Today. Clara found Eli doctoring his horse's cuts from the ambush. They're meeting the surveyor at Squaw Creek to finalize the route. His face was grim. Once that's done, legal or not, then we stop them. Clara? No. She faced him squarely. I'm done hiding, done waiting for justice to find us. Sometimes you have to meet it halfway. Something shifted in his expression. The marshals. Won't know where to look. We do. She touched his arm. You said I had steel in me. Let me use it. He studied her for a long moment. This woman covered in soot and ash, dress burned through in places, hair wild around her face. Then he smiled, just slightly. All right, but we do this smart. They gathered their allies, Josiah, Robert Yazzie, Morrison, a handful of others who'd proven themselves during the fire. The plan was simple: interrupt the meeting, delay until the marshals arrived. No violence unless they start it. Eli emphasized, we're law-abiding citizens protecting our interests. Law-abiding citizens who happen to be armed? Josiah added, checking his rifle. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, cutting through smoke that still hazed the air. Clara rode beside Eli, a borrowed pistol at her hip. She'd never felt more alive, more purposeful. After this is over, Eli said quietly, just for her ears. Yes. That conversation we didn't finish, about choices. He kept his eyes on the horizon. I'd like to finish it. I'd like that too. They found them at Squaw Creek, as Miguel had said Harlan, Riggs, Sheriff Mott, and a thin man in city clothes who must be the railroad surveyor. Maps spread across a folding table, the creek gurgling beside them like a witness. Gentlemen. Eli's voice carried clear across the water. Nice day for a meeting. Harlan went purple. You're trespassing. Public land. Morrison called out, Creek belongs to everyone. Sheriff, arrest them, Harlan demanded. Mott looked at the armed group, at the determination on their faces, and made a calculation. Now, Mr. Harlan, let's not be hasty. You coward! Riggs went for his gun, but Josiah's rifle was already aimed. I wouldn't, the blacksmith said mildly. The surveyor looked between the groups, clearly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should postpone. You'll sign now. Harlan snatched papers from the table. I own this water, this land. Actually, Clara stepped forward. You don't. From her saddlebag, she pulled a wrapped bundle old papers, yellow with age. The Yazzie family provided these Spanish grant maps, pre-territory. They show original water rights, communal usage agreements. Every claim you've made violates prior treaty.
Spanish grants mean nothing, Harlan sputtered. Maybe not in local court. Robert Yazzie said, but federal treaty obligations. Those matter, especially to railroad lawyers who don't want complications. The surveyor was already backing toward his horse. I think I need to consult with my superiors. Wait, Harlan grabbed for him. And everything exploded. Riggs drew and fired. Josiah's rifle boomed. Men scattered, horses rearing. In the chaos, Clara saw Eli go down, blood spreading across his shirt.
No,
She dropped beside him, pressing her hands to the wound.
Eli, stay with me.
He groaned, eyes finding hers.
Should have finished that conversation sooner.
Around them, the fight continued. Morrison had Mott at gunpoint. Josiah and Riggs circled each other like bears. Harlan scrambled for the dropped papers, trying to destroy evidence. Then, cutting through it all, came the clear note of a bugle. Military riders crested the ridge-blue uniforms, federal badges glinting. Federal marshals, everyone drop your weapons. The aftermath was swift. Riggs, wounded and defiant, was arrested. Harlan blustered about rights and property until the marshals examined Clara's evidence, the Spanish grants, the testimonies she'd gathered. Mott, seeing which way the wind blew, suddenly remembered all sorts of illegal activities he'd been investigating. But Clara cared about none of it. She knelt by Eli as the marshal's doctor worked, extracting the bullet from his shoulder. He'll live, the doctor announced. Lucky inch lower would have hit the lung. Relief made her dizzy. As they bandaged Eli, he reached up, touched her face with his good hand.
That conversation,
he said weakly. Can wait until you're healed. No. His grip tightened slightly. Clara Whitlow, I wanted you to be my woman from the moment you walked into that saloon. Didn't know how to say it right, but...
Yes?
She interrupted. Just yes. Around them, justice was finally being served. Water rights were being restored. Families were learning they could go home. The railroad would find another route, one that didn't profit from theft. But in that moment, by the creek that had seen so much conflict, Clara held the hand of a good man who'd stood with her, fought with her, nearly died with her. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Partners, Eli asked, managing a smile through his pain. Partners, Clara agreed, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted of smoke and promise and the sweet water of freedom running beside them. The Market Day Courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Every rancher, farmer, and townsperson within 50 miles had come to witness what many called the trial of the century, or at least of Dustford County. Canvas tents sprouted around the town square like mushrooms after rain, and Jake Matheson's saloon did more business in 3 days than in the previous 3 months. Clara stood before Judge Benjamin Hayes, a circuit judge known for his fairness and immunity to bribes, beside her. Eli kept a protective presence, his arm still bound from the gunshot wound but his eyes alert. The federal marshals had done their work well. Harlan sat in chains at the defendant's table, Riggs beside him, both men's expensive lawyers looking increasingly nervous. Miss Whitlow, Judge Hayes addressed her. You may present your evidence. Clara had prepared for this moment, but her hand still trembled as she opened the ledger. Your Honor, I kept careful records during my employment at the Harlan Ranch. This documents systematic theft of provisions meant for workers. She read entries in a clear voice, dates, amounts, discrepancies. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's pen and the occasional murmur from the gallery. Objection, Harlan's lawyer, a slick man named Pemberton, stood. This woman has no legal standing. She's merely a dismissed employee with a grudge. She has standing as a witness to fraud, Judge Hayes replied coldly. Continue, Miss Whitlow. Clara presented the false contracts, the manipulated water rights, the testimonies she'd gathered, one by one. Workers came forward, Miguel, others who'd found courage in her example. They spoke of debts they'd never incurred, work paid for at rates that changed mysteriously, water access denied to force land sales. Your Honor, Clara said, I also present these documents, provided by the Yazzie family. She carefully unfolded the Spanish grant maps. They prove that water rights in this valley were established as communal resources, predating Mr. Harlan's claims by 70 years. Robert Yazzie stepped forward to translate the Old Spanish, his education serving its purpose. The judge studied the documents carefully while Harlan grew redder and redder. This is preposterous, Harlan finally burst out. Spanish grants Mexican treaties. This is American land now. And America honors its treaty obligations, Judge Hayes said sharply. Or should, Mr. Yazzie. Are there other such documents? Many, Your Honor. My family and others have preserved them, hoping for justice. The morning stretched on. Witness after witness testified Josiah about workers coming to him unable to pay for horseshoes despite laboring dawn to dusk. Samuel Crane about families driven from generational homes. Jake about men drinking themselves to death from despair. Then Sheriff Mott took the stand, surprising everyone. Your Honor, Mott said, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I wish to testify about bribes I accepted from Mr. Harlan. The confession poured out money paid to look away from crimes, orders to harass those who wouldn't sell, the network of corruption that had strangled justice in the county. Mott seemed to shrink with each word, but he named names, dates, amounts. When noon came, Judge Hayes called for recess. The crowd surged outside, buzzing with excitement. Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers, women who'd stayed silent now telling their own stories of harassment and fear. You gave us a voice, Maria Yazzie said simply, taking Clara's hands. We won't forget. Eli appeared at her elbow, steering her away from the crowd. You need to eat. Keep your strength up. They found a quiet spot behind the church, sharing bread and cheese from his saddlebag. Clara leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. It's going well, she said. Too well. Harlan's not done fighting. Eli scanned the crowd constantly, watchful. Men like him don't give up power easily. He was right. When court reconvened, Pemberton came out swinging. Your Honor, I call into question this woman's character. Clara Whitlow arrived in our community under suspicious circumstances, immediately began associating with unsavory elements. Objection. The prosecutor, a young federal attorney named Davidson, stood. Miss Whitlow's character is not on trial here. It speaks to her credibility. Pemberton insisted. I have witnesses who will testify to her. Improper relationship with Eli Kane, including nights spent unchaperoned. The courtroom erupted. Women shouted in Clara's defense while some men nodded knowingly. Judge Hayes banged his gavel repeatedly. Clara stood, her face burning but her back straight. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge nodded. Mr. Pemberton is right. I stayed in Mr. Kane's cabin, unchaperoned. She let the gasps die down. I did so because his was the only roof that didn't come with a price, the only safety that didn't demand payment in dignity or worse. If that makes me improper, then I ask this court what is proper to submit to men like Riggs, to sign false contracts, to watch children go thirsty, while stolen water feeds stolen land. She turned to face the gallery. All these people who judged her, dismissed her, overlooked her. I came here to cook, that's all. To work honestly for honest pay. Instead, I found a community strangled by greed, silenced by fear. Yes, I stayed with Eli Kane. He protected me when the law wouldn't. He stood with me when standing was dangerous. If that's improper, then propriety be damned. The silence was deafening. Then,
From the back, slow clapping started. Josiah Washington, standing tall, then Maria Yazzie, then another, and another, until half the courtroom was applauding while the other half sat in shocked silence. Judge Hayes restored order, but something had shifted. When Pemberton tried to continue his character assassination, witness after witness defended Clara. Instead, women she'd fed extra portions. Men who'd seen her courage during the fire. Families who'd benefited from her organizing. Enough, Judge Hayes finally said. This court is concerned with fraud, theft, and corruption, not gossip. Mr. Harlan, do you wish to testify in your own defense? Harlan took the stand like a king ascending a throne, still believing his own authority absolute. But Davidson was ready, armed with Clara's meticulous documentation. Mr. Harlan, this ledger shows you charged workers for 20 pounds of flour while providing only 10. How do you explain this? Bookkeeping errors. Every week for 2 years. My foreman handled such matters. The same foreman who shot Mr. Kane, who threatened Miss Whitlow, who burned down the Henderson barn. I know nothing of, yet you profited from it all. Davidson's voice turned hard. Every family driven out. You bought their land. Every well that dried up after your improvements. You offered to buy water rights. Coincidence? The questioning continued relentlessly. Harlan's composure cracked, then shattered. He began ranting about his rights, his vision for the valley. How small people couldn't understand progress. Progress? Clara couldn't help herself. You call theft progress. I call it business, Harlan snarled at her. You think this valley would amount to anything without men like me? I brought order, development, future. You brought suffering, Eli said quietly, but his voice carried, you brought chains made of paper instead of iron, but chains nonetheless. The storm came then, as if nature itself wanted to witness the climax. Thunder rattled the windows as Judge Hayes retired to consider his verdict. The crowd huddled under whatever shelter they could find, unwilling to leave. Clara stood with Eli on the courthouse steps, watching lightning illuminate the valley. Each flash showed the patchwork of farms and ranches, the diverted waterways, the burned patches where the fire had raged. Whatever happens, Eli said, you changed things, gave people hope. We changed things, she corrected, all of us. When Judge Hayes returned, his face was grave. The courtroom fell silent except for the rain drumming on the roof. This court finds Silas Harlan guilty of systematic fraud, theft, and conspiracy. All contested water rights are returned to original holders as documented. All debts incurred through fraudulent contracts are void. Furthermore, Mr. Harlan will pay restitution to affected families and serve 10 years in federal prison. The crowd erupted, some cheered, some wept. Some sat stunned that justice had actually prevailed. Harlan bellowed threats until the marshals dragged him away, followed by Riggs. But the judge wasn't finished. Sheriff Mott, in recognition of your cooperation, this court sentences you to 1 year imprisonment and permanent ban from law enforcement. This county will hold new elections immediately. As people celebrated, debated, planned for a future suddenly possible again, Clara felt exhaustion hit like a physical blow. She'd carried this weight for months. And now, it's over, she whispered. No. Eli turned her to face him, his good hand gentle on her cheek. It's beginning. Question is, what do we begin? Around them, the storm was passing, afternoon sun breaking through to paint everything gold. The crowd was dispersing, heading home to spread the news, to reclaim what was theirs. Tomorrow there would be work water courses to restore, families to help rebuild, a community to heal. But for now, Clara stood in the circle of Eli's arms, while justice rained down like water on thirsty ground, washing away the dust of oppression. Partners, she asked, echoing their promise by the creek. Partners, he confirmed. In all things, if you'll have me. I already said yes. Worth saying twice, he said, and kissed her there on the courthouse steps while thunder rolled away eastward and the sun came out over a valley reborn. Behind them, Samuel Crane rang the church bells, calling the community to celebration, and they came ranchers and farmers, Mexicans and Anglos, former workers and established families, all united by shared struggle and common victory. Justice had come to Dustford at last, carried on the wings of a storm and the courage of a cook who'd refused to stay quiet. The water would flow free again, and with it, hope. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing wildflowers to the valley and new life to the community. The old Harlan Ranch had been divided among the workers he'd cheated, each family receiving a fair portion of land and, more importantly, guaranteed water access. Clara stood in what had once been Harlan's grand kitchen, now transformed into something entirely different. "Order up," she called, sliding plates across the counter. 3 beef stews, 2 shepherd's pies. The community kitchen, as they'd named it, served anyone who needed a meal workers rebuilding after the fires, families getting back on their feet, travelers passing through. The building hummed with conversation in 3 languages, laughter mixing with the clatter of dishes. "Never thought I'd see the day," Josiah said, accepting his lunch with a grateful nod. The blacksmith had been elected interim sheriff until proper elections could be held, this place serving folks instead of stealing from them. Maria Yazzie worked alongside Clara, teaching her traditional recipes that added variety to the menu. "My grandmother would be proud," she said, watching her son Robert help serve meals. "Water flowing free, people eating together, this is how it should be." Eli appeared in the doorway, still favoring his wounded shoulder but moving easier each day. He caught Clara's eye and smiled that private smile that still made her heart skip after 3 months of official courtship. "Train whistle," he announced. "First one coming through on the new route." Everyone moved to the windows and door to watch. The railroad had indeed come, but on terms negotiated fairly with the community. Instead of displacing families, it brought opportunities, contracts for supplies, passengers needing meals, connections to distant markets. Miss Clara, young Miguel ran in, clutching a letter. "From the territorial governor." Clara wiped her hands on her apron, opened the official-looking envelope. As she read, her eyes widened. "What is it?" Eli moved closer, protective as always. "They want me to testify before the territorial legislature about water rights reform, and..." She looked up, stunned. "They're offering me a position, helping establish fair labor practices for the territory." The kitchen went quiet. Everyone watched Clara, waiting. "It's a great honor," Robert Yazzie said carefully. "You'd be helping people across the territory, but you'd have to leave," Maria added softly. Clara looked around the kitchen, her kitchen, really, though she'd never claimed ownership. These people who'd become family. Eli, standing close but not pressuring, letting her choose. "I need to think," she said finally. That evening, she and Eli walked along the restored creek, water gurgling freely in its proper channels. The sunset painted everything gold and rose, and somewhere a meadowlark sang. "It's a good opportunity," Eli said quietly. "Important work. Are you trying to get rid of me, Mr. Kane?" "Never." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "But I won't be the chain that holds you back either. You've got gifts, Clara. Maybe they're meant for bigger things than a community kitchen." "Maybe they're not," she countered. "Maybe fighting the big fights means forgetting the small ones, the daily ones, feeding people. Building community, isn't that important too?" "Course it is. Question is what you want." Clara studied him, this good man who'd offered shelter without conditions, who'd stood beside her through everything. "What do you want?" "You," he said simply. "However, I can have you. If that means following you to the capital, I'll sell my horses and learn to wear city clothes, if it means staying here. I'll build us a house by the creek and thank God every morning you're in it."
"Eli Kane, are you proposing?" "Been trying to for weeks. Keep getting interrupted by governing bodies and civic duties." He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's. Had it in my saddlebag when Riggs shot me. Figured it was a sign to stop waiting for perfect moments." Clara's throat tightened.
"Eli."
"Let me finish. Clara Whitlow. You came here to cook. Instead, you fed a whole community's hunger for justice. You've got steel in you, but also kindness, strength, but also grace. I wanted you to be my woman from that first night. But now I know better. I want you to be my partner, my equal, my wife, if you'll have me."
"Yes," Clara said, not needing to think. "Yes to all of it."
He slipped the ring on her finger with hands that trembled slightly. When he kissed her, it tasted of promise and permanence and home.
"About that job,"
Clara said when they broke apart. "I have an idea." 2 weeks later, they were married in the little church, Samuel Crane officiating. Clara wore a simple dress Maria and the other women had sewn, carried wildflowers Eli had gathered that morning. The whole community turned out, filling the church and spilling into the yard. "Do you, Clara, take this man?" Samuel began.
"I do,"
Clara interrupted, making everyone laugh.
"Sorry, Reverend, I've been ready to say that for months."
After the ceremony, they held the reception at the community kitchen. Clara had written to the governor, accepting the position but with conditions she would work from Dustford, traveling when needed but maintaining her base in the community that had taught her the real meaning of justice. She would document and share what worked here, helping other communities organize. "Raise your glasses," Jake Matheson called out, standing on a chair. To Clara and Eli Kane, proof that sometimes wanderers find home and fighters find peace. To partnership, Josiah added, in all its forms. As the celebration continued around them, Clara and Eli slipped outside. The first stars were appearing, and somewhere a coyote called across the desert. "Regrets?" Eli asked. "None." Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of her husband. "We'll do good work here, together." "Together," he agreed. A year later, Clara stood before the territorial legislature, presenting her report on community-based water management and fair labor practices. She spoke of ledgers and laws, but also of people Miguel now running his own small farm, the Yazzie family's thriving trading post, Josiah elected sheriff properly, the community kitchen that had become a model copied in 3 other towns. "Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty," she concluded. "It's about empowering the vulnerable, not just tearing down corrupt systems, but building fair ones. It starts with one voice saying no to exploitation. It grows when communities stand together. It succeeds when we remember that law should serve people, not the other way around." The applause was thunderous. Later, officials would tell her it was the most effective testimony they'd ever heard. Bills would be passed, reforms enacted, lives changed across the territory. But Clara's thoughts were already turning homeward, to the man waiting with their horses outside, to the community that needed its daily bread, to the child she suspected was growing within her a new life to carry forward the lessons of courage and community. The train ride home was long but peaceful. Eli dozed beside her, his hand covering hers where it rested on her still flat stomach. Through the window, she watched the landscape roll by desert and mountain, ranch and farm, all the wide spaces where people struggled and survived and sometimes, with luck and courage, thrived. She'd come west to cook, nothing more, a woman alone, seeking honest work in a dishonest world. Now she returned as part of something larger, a voice for the voiceless, a partner in all things, a builder of community. The train whistle blew, lonely and lovely across the darkening plains. Clara closed her eyes and smiled, thinking of the words she'd spoken in court, the truth that had set them all free. I came here to cook. And she'd fed bodies and souls, nourished hope and courage, served up justice with the daily bread. In the end, wasn't that what cooking was really about? Taking raw ingredients, flour and water, law and conscience, fear and courage, and transforming them into something that could sustain life. The train carried them home through the darkness, toward the lights of Dustford glowing like stars on the horizon. Somewhere, the community kitchen waited, ready for tomorrow's meal. The creek flowed freely, singing its old song, and in the midst of it all, a wooden sign hung by the door, painted in Clara's careful hand. All are welcome at this table. She had come to cook. She had stayed to build a world where everyone could eat. The story was ending, but the meal, the community, the life, the love went on. Thank you all so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please leave a comment below to let me know, so we can connect and share our thoughts about Clara and Eli's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Hit that like button, and don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these stories of courage, love, and justice on the frontier. Until next time, partners.